Hi, this is David Thompson, and I'm here to talk with the Enrons about your new favorite song, Original Sin.
To me there was no past, only now and again. And how long could this last? 5 years, maybe 10.
Hello and welcome to Your New Favorite Song, a podcast brought to you by the Enrons, where each week we will feature a recently released song from an independent artist. My name is Dennis and I will be your host. Today I'm speaking to David Thompson about his song, Original Sin, which is a dark indictment of the true nature of original sin, and it's not what you'd expect. Hello, David.
Good afternoon, and thank you for having me. I'm really excited to be here.
Yeah, thank you for joining us today. And maybe before we start off on the song, you could tell us a little bit about yourself and your background and your influences.
Yeah, sure. So I'm actually not a musician by trade. I'm a lawyer, or I don't know if if you're in Canada or Great Britain, you might understand it to be a barrister or some other term, but I practice law. So music is kind of a secondary interest of mine. My influences, I really like Leonard Cohen. I like Nick Cave. I like Pink Floyd. One of the things I guess that I work towards is I like to develop the thematic contents of my songs. I have an emphasis on poetry. Kind of like Mr. Cohen has said about himself, he has a very slow process for how he puts songs together, and he thinks very carefully about them. He's obviously much better at it than I am, and I wouldn't compare myself to him, but he's something of an example for me in terms of how to put things together, and why you even sit down to write in the first place.
So why do you sit down and write in the first place?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I frequently I ask that question myself of whoever it is that I'm listening to. And if I'm going to sit down and write, usually it's going to be because there's some larger thing that's bothering me, frankly. The idea that there's something maybe that's not very obvious, something that you can maybe shed some light on that people haven't thought about before, or maybe they haven't thought as deeply about before. It seems to me one of the great things that happened back in the 60s, where I draw a lot of my influences, is things seem to have a great concentration on girls and cars thematics, and it was all very ephemeral and fun. And then you have this revolution with Bob Dylan and the Beatles, and suddenly there's more in the way of art, and there's people that are thinking about the contents of their music. They're thinking about these larger themes in the world around them.
But didn't you have things, the American scene, but Woody Guthrie and people like that, this machine kills fascists, that's like the 40s, 30s, so that was all going on. The very early blues roots, country roots, is all very much themes, larger themes.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and you can even go back deeper than that. You can go to Robert Johnson back in the 30s, and Charlie Patton talking about, when the levee breaks, for example, which is a song that's been copied many times. I mean, these were people with very big issues on their mind, and music was their way of confronting those issues and teaching other people about those issues. And you can hear in their voices, you can hear in the recordings, this is not the product of light, ephemeral thinking. This is the product of deep experiences and deep reflection on those experiences. And now I would not obviously count myself among them, but going back to your earlier question, influences, there's got to be a reason you sit down to write. And so I typically try to identify things such as the song that you're featuring, things that bother me that maybe no one has said or thought about before.
And so you're saying deep influences and thinking deeply, but are there specific things in your own experience that have influenced you to write this song?
Sure. Obviously, this song has, at least on the surface, the idea here is religion, and this is something I myself grew up in a religious household, and it's something that I've obviously had a lifetime, at least my own lifetime anyway, to think about. And my goal with this song, and in my music generally, the stuff that I write, is not really. It may seem at first blush to be an attempt to shake other people's faith, but actually it's not religion as such that's in the crosshairs here. It's more the question of inherited views, if you will, things that you take from others and you don't really think about for yourself at all. For those people who come to religious faith or religious sentiment, and it's something that they invest in personally and they have an understanding of it, they've thought deeply about it. The idea, for example, that Fyodor Dostoevsky was not a religious person, or Leo Tolstoy. Certainly they were. These were some of the great writers who drew much of their life and work from religious faith. And my goal would not to be to shake people. My goal would be to take those people who maybe are struggling with the fact that the things that they hold deeply are inherited. They were kind of given to them in a package, and they're only just now unpackaging what it is that they were given, and they're going to try to sort it out for themselves. That is where my work would come in, to suggest that you don't have to just take what people give you in these packages. You can take it apart. So.
And I think sometimes that the United States is actually a deeply fundamental religious culture. There are, we talked about Islam, but I mean the Christian faith in the United States is very, very deeply fundamental in some parts of it. So how do you think your music reflects that? Or this song?
Sure, I do think it's a reflection of that. As you indicate, religion plays a very large role in this country. One of our major political parties has I would argue that both have religion in them, but one of them is a little bit more explicit and a little bit louder than the other about it. And I think that sometimes those religious sentiments are kind of they are things that people feel they can tap into, that they know their constituency or their audience hasn't really thought about. This is just a simple thing that you can say and get a big reaction. Whereas people who have thought carefully about their religious faith, they will have a very, very different reaction than those who haven't, those who have just inherited. So
and you say those who have thought about their religious faith. Are you personally religious?
I'm not. I'm agnostic. I think that I would never call never is maybe not the right word, but I don't currently call myself atheist or religious. What I find is that both sides of that coin are in a position that I find untenable, which is they both find themselves in some absolute certainty. One side is absolutely certain that there is a God. The other one is absolutely certain that there's not, whereas I kind of take the position of I'm really not sure of anything. And I could be persuaded or I could experience something on any given day that might push me in either direction.
Yeah, and have you had any experiences which would push you, let's say, towards a more spiritual direction?
Absolutely. I think I would say that I am spiritual, and I've had many experiences that convince me that there is something greater that exists. Now, the contours of it, the principles of it, the requirement of piety, for example, I'm not sure about any of it. I don't know what it looks like, but I can't say that it's there, but I suspect that there may be something. And the idea that being spiritual means you're religious, that's another proposition, I guess, that I would reject out of hand. It's entirely possible to be one without the other.
I also think there are three things. There's religion, there's God, and there's spirituality. And I believe in religion because I know it exists. I don't believe in God because I don't know it exists. And I believe in spirituality because I know that I have had experiences myself and I know that it exists. So there are three different things, and I think people kind of tend to confuse those three or put them all in one lump. And that's why I was really curious about this song that ignited me. There's this, actually, the line, original sin. It's just, I was born a Catholic, or brought up a Catholic, born a Catholic. No, I wasn't born a Catholic. I was baptized a Catholic, but I was born into a Catholic family. That's the thing for me that started my journey away from religion, was this idea of original sin. You know, you're born already a sinner, and you have to be baptized to be saved. And I think that's just, it's just not fair. I was about 10 at the time, but even as you carry on and think about it, it's actually a way to kind of grab you into religion, into organized religion.
Yeah, and I have to say, I have the exact same problem, and I think you've articulated it really, really well. It's this question of, coming into a situation, you didn't ask to even be here in the first place. So life is something that you didn't choose in the first place. And then this idea that not only do you have life, which you didn't choose, but you are inherently corrupted or polluted or stained from the very beginning, from the inception. It's a proposition. I don't find any evidence to support it. B, I'm not so sure that this is really a healthy thing to be teaching, especially children. I find that to be very troublesome. Of course, if you were to tell these things to an adult who'd never heard it before, they wouldn't believe it. It's only a malleable mind that will be receptive to it. And to me, that's also very, very troubling. And doesn't it say something about the purported creator? If the creator creates something that is inherently flawed,
which apparently he should not be able to do because we're created in his image, if you believe that. So there's a lot of contradictions. We're created in his image. He loves us, but then we're all created evil, or with original sin, which is inherited from Adam and Eve.
Correct, and that's another. And I mean, let's face it, that there are many, many contradictions in whatever religion it is that you're going to look at. It's rife with contradictions. It's also rife with vagaries. There are undefined terms. There are imprecise concepts, and they are so broad and they are so undefined and ambiguous that they essentially allow the user to choose whatever reading you want. And not to say that human creativity is a bad thing. It's not. It's a wonderful thing. But giving that kind of power to somebody that they can use such a broad and ambiguous text to justify anything, any goal, or any means, to me is a going back to what I said earlier about absolute certainty. The people that really are willing to do bad things are sometimes the same people who are absolutely certain in the righteousness of their cause.
Yeah.
And I find that to be very, very troubling.
So how does that come into the song? Because the song is called Original Sin, and the line is, if God have original sin, then God, now if there was original sin, then God was having a song.
We're the only ones. If there's original sin, then God's was having a son.
It's a really curious line. What do you mean by that?
Sure. Well, so the very first thing to notice is that it's constructed as an if-then proposition. So it's not, you don't have to accept the conditional aspect of that sentence. You can reject it. And if you reject the if, you don't even have to get to the then part of the sentence. So, but if we are going to accept for a moment that this is a thing that exists and it's real, we do live in this condition of original sin. It's entirely appropriate for us to submit that condition to examination, put it under the microscope, and say, why is this, and where did it come from? And while I do find that this, so moving from the if part of that sentence to the then part of the sentence, if assuming that you say, yes, there is original sin, well, then you get to the second part, and then God was having a son. One of the great impressive moral figures, in my opinion, is Christ, the human being, the historical figure. I think a lot of the stuff that he says and a lot of the stuff that you get from the New Testament is actually quite impressive. And I do think it's a roadmap for how many of us can live our lives and empathize with others. He's a very impressive figure, and that moral code, there is something in there that I think we can all attach to. And I personally believe that it is a very, very good and useful moral code. But as we've already identified, the creator has created something that is inherently flawed. So there's that problem.
Mm-hmm.
Further, the creator has then given a part of himself, given birth to something immaculately, apparently, if we're to believe it. There is this immaculate birth,
conception.
Yes, there's this thing that comes into being.
Yeah.
That is both God and man. So you have essentially one being that's participating in both worlds, the sacred world and the profane world, the divine and the world and the human world.
Mm-hmm.
So whatever it is that we're stained with, this new being, this new individual is also going to be stained. Right. And again, this is all at the design, the intention of the creator. And doesn't that again say something about that creator? And if if you think about the word original, we're looking to the origin of a thing.
Mm.
Well, if the creator itself is flawed, then it gives and then creates something that is also flawed. It's hard for me to accept that we are the one, that the origin is really with us. The origin in this case would have to be with the creator.
Yes.
And so, it's, I guess what I've tried to do is I've tried to take the words apart and try to process them through a very, very different machine than religious faith. Religious faith, there's a lot of acceptance. That's, I think, the whole idea of belief is that you are kind of setting aside your reasoning and your logic in favor of this other alternative. And I will admit kind of at the outset that's not what I'm doing. I'm employing a completely different mode. I'm taking these words apart and I'm processing them through a logical framework. And when you do that, I think, at least as the best that I've been able to do it, and as this song is kind of a manifestation of that, when you do that, this story doesn't really add up.
Yeah.
We can't be the origin of this, and therefore to say that we're the ones with original sin. We may be born into sin if you accept this whole proposition. We may be born into it, but it's certainly the origins are not with us.
Yeah, and what I like about what you've just said is that it doesn't take away from your experience of God or spirituality. A lot of people say, even Jesus said, you have to accept faith. To Thomas the doubter. There are people who will not see the evidence, so you have to have faith and believe what you haven't seen. But you also can use your own logic and your mind and your knowledge and science to analyze the experience of God or experience of spirituality, and they are not mutually exclusive. It doesn't mean you don't have to believe in God just because you are logical or you're looking at things like you said. You place the origin of sin back to God, which of course is logical, and it doesn't deny the existence of God at all.
Correct. And nor does it deny the existence of sin if you accept that as a proposition. Those two things are absolutely compatible. And going back to the question of the creator versus the product or the creation, the creator created us, and among those things in our tool set are things like logic and reason. We are able, as human beings, we have the capacity to analyze things, to take them apart, to see trends, to basically engage in a scientific process where there's experiment, there's results, there's reproducibility, there's falsifiability.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I have come to find kind of unacceptable, at least for me, is all the non-falsifiable propositions you just have to kind of accept. If you are, if you are going to lead what is kind of traditionally or typically understood to be a religious life. I mean, these are things that you can't submit to scientific experiment. You can't reproduce results. Other third parties can't come in and look at it and get the same results. It's non-falsifiable. You either believe it or you don't without evidence.
Well, we've gone quite deep down the rabbit hole there. It's a really a topic that is quite close to my heart, which I think is why I like this song very much. But what I'd like to move on is a little bit more towards how you made the song, because you're not a professional musician. So how did you go about recording the song and getting it out there? It's quite an interesting process.
Sure. So it all starts with an acoustic guitar. I'm blessed to own. Well, I'm not going to say the name of the guitar because I don't want to promote anything. But I have my acoustic guitar.
You can say the name of the guitar other people have.
I'm not big on promoting things if I don't have to. But anyway, so I start with the acoustic guitar, and actually I should kind of go back even further. What I do is I start with the idea. It popped in my head one day, that line. It all started with the what is, I guess you could call it, the chorus. Yeah. If there's original sin, then God was having a son. It starts there. And there's something about that that's bothering. And now it's my job to figure out, why did this pop into my brain? What is going on here? Does it have any legs on it? Is there something else to develop here? So the first step is to explore the concept of it and try, if it does in fact have some concrete meaning for me, the next step is to try to get the words out, to try to explain why. So that's the lyric writing and the poetry.
Yeah.
Then I sit down with the acoustic guitar, and of course it's always a question of, well, you need short enough progressions and phrases that will fit what you're doing with the words so that the timing works out. And then once you have the guitar sections laid down and you know where the verses and the chorus are going to go, and you have to allow enough space for other things. There's some piano sections in there. There's a lead guitar piece in there. Not a lot. I mean, it's a pretty stripped down track. I think most listeners who have heard it would agree. And then from there, once you have all of those basic elements, it's trying to figure out, okay, is there any other, what I like to think of as like color to put into it.
Okay.
And, we're blessed these days with technologies. I have a MIDI controller. I've got software that enables me to come up with any number of sounds just through the MIDI controller. And then, put those sounds in where I see fit.
And have you got an example of a sound that you put in?
Yeah, sure. I mean, there are certain string sections. There's certain synthesizers that are put into it just to give it more atmosphere. As again, going back to my influences as a big Pink Floyd fan, for example, I'm a big fan of atmospheric production. I like the idea that while some of the music, and I'm not a very talented musician, but I like the idea that despite that, you can still create something of a world and an atmosphere that hopefully maps onto the overall theme and the lyrics that you've written. So.
And one thing I was just thinking of, when you're writing the song, you start from your lyrics, you start from your text. Do you write the text kind of with a rhyme or a meter in your head while you're writing?
Typically, no. Typically, there is the very first kind of phase of the process for me is I want to get everything down that's striking. And it doesn't matter. It can be kind of beatnik, stream of consciousness. Just get it all down on the paper, and then later on, I'll come back and I'll understand. Okay, well, here's the guitar riff that I have for it, and here's the time and the tempo. So these phrases need to be shorter, and then you kind of have to employ some craftsmanship to get the lyrics to fit into the tempo and the timing of the musical composition.
Okay, right. So you're not. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Sometimes it happens like that for me as well. It's like you have a piece of music and then you've got to fit the words to it. And sometimes if I'm starting from the words, I'm already kind of forming it in my mind how it's going to sound. But I also do this stream of consciousness stuff, and then just pick out the best sentences and.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
So, you recorded all this yourself? You played all the instruments yourself?
Yeah, this is all done just on a laptop computer.
And then the mixing and the mastering you've also done, or have you done mastering somewhere else?
No, it's all me. And a number of people have pointed out to me that there are other ways, other directions you could have taken this song, whether different compressors you could have used or whatever the case may have been. But to my kind of primitive tastes and abilities, what the final product that you hear is what made sense.
And then did that match with your original idea, or do you think I could have done it differently, or would have rather?
No, it matches exactly. I think it ended up better really than I thought it could be at first. Sometimes I think it depends. Sometimes I naturally go very minimal with the arrangements and with the instrumentation, and then other times I kind of go overboard with it and it gets very, very cluttered. And this time was more like the former, where I knew it was going to be kind of minimal instrumentation wise, arrangement wise. And if anything, I added just a little bit of what I call kind of the atmospheric stuff, the color stuff into it. But no, it matched pretty much as well or better than I thought it would in the first instance.
So you're really happy with it?
Yeah, I am. I'm very happy with it, and I've gotten a great response from it. And it's enabled me the privilege of talking with you this afternoon, which is just I've never done anything like this before, and it's really, really neat and exciting. So it's taken me places I did not know I could go. Well,
and are you going to be carrying some very nice link to the next section, which is, where are you going to go from here? What's next?
Sure. Well, I have an entire backlog of stuff that I've recorded. Some of it is really, really old, going back to 2011, which I guess really, really old may or may not be appropriate to describe 2011. For me, it seems very, very old, but I'm always thinking things to write down. I'm always coming up with a new riff. And I've probably got 4 or 5 things I'm looking at right now. Lately, I've been thinking a lot about King Crimson, and their penchant for these very extended compositions that oftentimes don't have any lyrics. It's just instrumentation, and any King Crimson or progressive rock fan there's a shorthand, you'll know what I'm talking about. But for those who don't, it's, progressive rock is essentially an abandonment of any kind of formula, or at least conventional formulae that we're familiar with. And so lately I've been thinking if I could just release maybe 30 minutes, there'll be shorter songs with 4 or 5 songs, but just these kind of lyric, no lyric, just instrumentals that
like a soundscape.
Yeah, kind of. And they can have softer sections and they can have more aggressive sections. Any King Crimson listener will know there's a little bit of everything with them. And so I've kind of been thinking about something like that.
Oh, okay. And do you also perform live anywhere?
I do just go to local coffee houses in my town. When they have open mic nights, I have been known to stop by on occasion and just play small acoustic sets, like 15 minutes. And of course, nowadays with the pandemic, that's, I don't know that anyone's really touring or doing any open mics, but
so that's not going to be happening for a while, I don't think.
I suspect not, but you never know. My understanding is that comedians have kind of figured out a way to kind of carry on the best they can, whether it's parking lot shows or rooftop shows or doing a show on a farm or something like that. So maybe musicians will kind of come to a similar type of thing.
Yeah, I think if you're a big a big name, then you could probably do something. It's like live streaming. If I don't know, Dua Lipa or somebody like that, or Ed Sheeran does a live stream, then they're guaranteed to get a couple of 100,000 people watching. But
sure.
If you're already a struggling musician, then nobody's coming to watch your live stream, or maybe 1 or 2 friends. But
yeah, well, and that's actually one reason why I have to say I'm not really good at promotion, generally speaking. But one thing I noticed about you and what you're doing, your work, I think is just very, very important. And more so not for people like me, but for people who really are trying to make a go of it. Mm-hmm. And they're trying to make a living out of it. And I think your work is so important to give them that opportunity to get exposure. And I just want to say thank you for doing the work that you're doing in that respect.
Well, it's not work. I quite enjoy it. I get to meet and speak to a lot of very interesting and diverse people. So for me, it's a real pleasure. So, I mean, only remains for me, I think, to say is where can we find you on the internet? If we, promote yourself, this is your moment to plug yourself.
Sure. Thank you for the opportunity. I'm pretty simple. I just have a Facebook website, DWT Music, like my initials, and then music. That's pretty much where I anything that I'm doing in the way of music, whether it's my own work or if I've heard somebody else's work that I really like, I will I'll put together a review and try to promote stuff that I hear from other independent artists who really, I mean, there's, as you probably know better than myself, and in the journey that you've taken with this, there are so many fantastic independent artists out there. People I have no business even occupying the same room as them in terms of what they've accomplished and their creativity. And so whether it's my own stuff or whether it's just to get an idea. I mean, if you share my musical taste, if you're a Nick Cave fan, if you're a Leonard Cohen fan, if you're a Pink Floyd fan, it's not improbable that you will, maybe it's not my stuff, but maybe I will have attached to another independent artist with whom you also will be able to form an attachment. So DWT Music on Facebook.
DWT Music. And now talking about other indie artists to attach to, who would you tell us that we've got to be attached to in the next, in this, who is your shout out?
Do I only get one?
You can have as many as you like.
Okay. There are three that have really stood out to me, and I'm going to list them not in any sort of rank order. In fact, I'll deliberately shuffle them in my own head. So there are these gentlemen out in Toronto. Their name is called Find the Red Sparrow. They have a song called Below. And I heard that song, and again, going back to my interest in progressive rock, I don't know that their intention was to create something that was post or progressive rock, but it sounds that way to me. It's a lovely piece called Below. Another gentleman, he goes under the name Andy Cigarette. His work is just exquisite. I don't know how he's doing what he's doing. His stuff is, some of it feels progressive, some of it feels like modern pop, some of it are just these musical interludes, and he kind of throws everything together, but he has great command of his creativity, so it doesn't ramble on and on, kind of like I sometimes have a tendency to do, and I apologize. And then the third I'll mention are these gentlemen from South Africa. Their name's High Water Bridge. They have a recent release. It's a full LP. Really, really good work. I hope I'm not getting the pronunciation wrong, but one of their tracks is called Andromedonkin. I think I'm saying that correctly, but I apologize to those fine gentlemen if I'm not. That was the song that kind of captured me, and then I invested more time into the rest of their LP, and it's really, really good. And I've had the chance to kind of chat and exchange notes with their guitarist, and go out and support independent artists. There's a world of music out there.
Yeah, there definitely is. What I will do is I'll put your links to your pages, and I will also put links to these three artists also in the show notes. So once you've listened to the podcast, you can go and listen to some more great music. So that was it for today. And just remains for me to say thank you very much, David, for a very stimulating conversation.
Well, thank you. And thank you again, also just generally for the work you're doing. This is really great work.
Okay. Thanks very much.
The last thread is frayed. How could they think that we're the only one?
We hope you enjoyed this podcast and that you come away with an appreciation of the creative process and, more importantly, have found your new favourite song. All of the songs featured in the show are on our Spotify playlist, The Enrons New Favourites, and you can find all the links mentioned in the podcast in the show notes below. If you enjoyed this podcast, then please hit the subscribe button. And also, we are now dropping our episodes on Monday rather than a Saturday, so keep on subscribing and you'll get the episodes on the right day. If you want to help us to continue making and growing the podcast, as well as releasing new music, then you can either buy us a coffee or become a regular patron. See the show notes for details. If you're not in the financial position to do that, then you can also help out by leaving a rating and a review on iTunes. That really helps with increasing visibility for us and the artists on the show, and will benefit us much more than it will be a pain for you. Next week, I'll be talking to the 14-year-old Australian DJ Helmet Boy about his collaboration with 13-year-old American rapper Young Marcello about their hip-hop track Ramped Up. Thanks for listening, and see you next week.
We're given more than instincts, but to what end? Does it help us think of others? Does it help us be a friend? We have unfinished business. Our work is not done. If there's original sin, then God's was having a son.